He's a retired agent from the DEA. He's also a college professor and a podcaster, and he's coming up. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. If you want to be a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, simply contact us. It couldn't be easier. You can send us a message on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show page, or email jay@letradio.com. That's JAY at letradio.com. Calling us from Massachusetts, we have Dr. Steve Morreale on the Law Enforcement Show. Doc, thanks for being a guest. Very much appreciated.
Hey, glad to be here, Jay. How's it going down there?
It's wonderful down here. By the way, I'm called Steve Doc. He is a doctor, and he is also has a podcast called The Cop Doc, which you can get on the LET Podcast Network. Go to letradioshow.com, the Be Heard tab, LET Podcast Network. You'll find it right there. You can also do a Google search for Cop Doc Podcast as well. And you got a long career in law enforcement. Rather than me butcher this, Doc, let's start from the beginning. Brief overview of your career, start to finish.
Sure, happy. So I started as an auxiliary in Massachusetts, and that wasn't much to it, but it got me involved in policing. You'd get called, and you'd shut down a street, or you'd cover an accident after they were taking a report. After that, I decided I was going to go into the military. So many of my relatives had served in the military, and I thought it was my time, so I went in the Army. I became an MP. I was a military police officer, and I came out, went back to school, and I became a police officer in New Hampshire, a small city in New Hampshire, 50 officers, 40,000 people in town, and that's where I got my start. Then I moved on, went to the Drug Enforcement Administration, where I was an agent and traveled the world, and ended up retiring after becoming a manager.
Awesome. And now you're a college professor too, right?
I am. Right now I'm serving as the chair and a professor. I've been doing that for 15 years, my second career. I'm in a department at Worcester State University, which is in central Massachusetts. We've got about 500 students, 10 faculty, so I'm teaching. Unfortunately, we're teaching online, Zoom only.
Gotcha. I'm sure that's a real wear on you and the students as well.
It is. It is. But, I'll tell you, Jay, one of the things we end up doing is, if you've been playing in the podcast world or whatever, just talking to people, I run it. Unfortunately, the kids don't like that as much. But I run it as if it's a talk show, and we keep them engaged. That's the important thing. And we're trying to help them understand how difficult policing is and whether or not that's what they want to do. And that not all want to become police officers, but in the criminal justice field overall.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a source of contention. So many people, and I'll be honest with you, Doc, I blame Hollywood, television, movies, social media, you name it, news media, about their portrayal of policing. Policing in the United States is nothing like what people are exposed to on TV, and they believe that's the reality.
Well, I'm afraid you're absolutely right. And so many students that will come in, and they all now want to be CSI investigators. And you think to yourself, if you're not a scientist, if you're not a chemist, if you don't specialize in biology, you are not going to be a chemist. And so the jobs are out there are very, very slim. But there are some people, listen, Jay, there's a lot of people who come to school, and CJ is a very popular, no matter where, it's a very popular major. Not everybody is cut out to be a police officer, as you well know. But we try to talk to them in real terms, how difficult the job is, how, police suicides. And I listen to your show all of the time, that thing you're talking about, and what we've been watching on TV is just crazy. But we have to but what I try to do is humanize the police officer, and that when somebody's making an arrest, it is never going to look good on camera, never, because the other person does not want to be taken into custody. So it's going to look pretty rough. And oh my God, when you talk about brutality, I say to them, is that brutal? When somebody bites me and I want to push their face off of my arm, and I have to maybe punch them or swing at them, is that brutal? I don't think so. It's getting them to stop or release my skin from their teeth.
The point is well taken. There's an old saying, no one wants to see sausage or hot dogs being made, but everybody likes to eat them. No one ever wants to see police use of force. It's never looks good. I was taught by the old timers. They said, if you have to use force, be quick, be swift, and make it over. Because this pity pat stuff people do. And this is a bone of contention I have with modern law enforcement. So much of it is grappling nowadays. Look, we were taught never to do that. Never to do that because it puts yourself in a position where you were extremely vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah, so don't pity pat. If you got to hit someone, hit them. Talk about it. Don't lie about it. Be truthful about it, and get over it.
Yes, that's very true.
And when they're handcuffed, it's over.
Yes. That's the best part. You're absolutely right, and that's what gets people in trouble too. It's the aftermath. But the adrenaline, the emotion gets involved, and so that takes training and experience to kind of get over that. And
unfortunately, the only way you get experience is by doing the job.
Yes.
I look back, and you don't have to agree with me or disagree. I look back, and when I was a rookie police, I was an idiot. I thought I knew everything. I really did, and it took about 5 years before I really became good at what I was doing. And then the next 5 years was so hard on me physically and mentally.
Well, it's not an easy job. And as I've heard you say in the past, it's lots of sedentary time, sitting, waiting, nothing. And then the next thing you know, your adrenaline goes. And so imagine, for people who do not have that experience, imagine what happens physiologically to yourself when you're rolling on a call and there's potentially a gun, or there's a colleague that is crying for help or calling for help, and you're moving towards it, and it really affects your body. Your body gets ready, you get mentally ready, and you may be in a world of hurt for a little while, and then it passes. And so the body is just going, you have the heart and everything else going up and down and up and down. It's not easy on the human body.
It isn't. And I think that's universal from every branch of law enforcement. I was very fortunate in my career. I was detailed to DEA for almost a year and a half, almost 2 years out of Baltimore. And I got to work with exceptional people, and there were federal agents. And I also got to work with a lot of great law enforcement officers who were local, who were detailed like me. And we worked all over the state of Maryland and went down to Florida, did some things down here as well. But even they didn't get a break from it. They may not have been exposed to it every day to the same amount that the city police were, but they still caught brutality. They still caught violence. They still caught a lot of trauma. They do, and I will tell you, Jay, and I'm glad that you brought up the fact that you were a task force officer. They were great to work with. For example, for my experience was that I just loved working with local police officers, and DEA is all about that. And I would say that I became a better DEA agent for having been a local police officer and understanding what their day-to-day job is before I became a Fed. And by the way, I have people tell me all the time, I want to become an FBI agent. And I'm like, do you have a college degree? Are you a lawyer? Are you an accountant? Well, the chances are you're not getting the FBI. You want to be in DEA? Unless you have law enforcement and a college degree, you're not getting there as well either. And look, those agencies, just like everybody in law enforcement, it's a recruiting nightmare trying to find the best. And when we have people who have college, military experience, they have many, many options. Many are opting not to join this honorable profession. This is the Law Enforcement Show. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
Imagine earning an extra $500 to $5,000 a month or more from the comfort of your home or business, all with Facebook. That's right. Meta is paying people just like you every month. Learn how to create another revenue stream from Meta and dramatically increase your reach, all without breaking your own time bank. Sign up for a free membership at letbreak.com. letbreak.com. That's letbreak.com.
Return conversation with Dr. Steve Morreale. He is a retired DEA agent. He's got many years of law enforcement experience, and he's also a college professor and a podcaster. Before we went to break, Doc, we talked a little bit about what you teach. And is there a reason why you decided you want to be an educator?
Well, that's interesting because I did a lot of training with the DEA, and my wife once said to me, "Why do you think you got into teaching?" And I say that it's because you're trying to have an impact on other people. So, yes, I'm teaching criminal justice courses, law enforcement and society, strategic planning, drugs, law and society, American judicial, capstone, and leadership.
Do you find that when you teach, if you're like me, you don't lie, you don't tell stories. I don't even do the war stories bit anymore because everybody's got those. But I try to tell people the reality of what life is like for law enforcement officers. And when I do, when it doesn't match up with what their preconceived stereotypes are, I'm labeled as propaganda. Do you get that at all?
All the time. And I say to people once, the best time for young people is in college. They don't realize it until afterwards. And then when you figure out that you want to do something like this as a police officer, corrections officer, a lawyer, all of a sudden, it's not that you're owned, but this is a demanding job, or policing is a demanding job. And as you well know, Jay, with manpower problems, very often you think you're going home, and the next thing you know, somebody calls out sick, and you are on for a 16-hour ride. And so I make them understand that it's not as easy as it seems. And so to me, it's about being honest with people.
And that's exactly where I run into problems. I've been told so often when people automatically assume that police shoot everybody. The slightest sign of gunplay and it's shots fired. And I just tell people a little bit of my story. I was in 4 shootings in 10 years. And the first 2, I never even fired a shot back because immediately I knew the threat was over. And you could explain why. That be the topic of a whole show. There were times we had kids armed with BB guns, replicas, that you didn't shoot them. You don't know why at the time. It just worked out that way, thank God. And when you tell people that, they're like, that's a lie.
Well, it's not a lie. I could tell you what I say to so many of my colleagues, and I'm so lucky. Listen, once you're a police officer, it's there is a brotherhood, and no matter where I go, I just came back from Ireland where I was working with the Garda, the Irish National Police, and it's just an amazing opportunity. But many times it's not about training; it's about a little bit of luck that you get out of a jam. That you don't make that mistake, and then you kind of wipe yourself off and say, thank goodness that didn't go sour.
Absolutely. And by the way, the Garda are great. I've talked to so many law enforcement in the United Kingdom, other parts of Europe, and all of them are doing the same type of thing where they're overworked, they're understaffed, and they're expected to handle and solve every problem in society. And when people have a dispute with the government, right or wrong, the most accessible branch of the government is your police department, and they're the ones who catch the brunt of it.
Yes, I agree with that. And actually, that's one of the reasons that I started the podcast. I wanted to give back the best that I could. I wanted to share with people. I wanted to talk with people like you do. It's amazing. And anybody that I've asked to jump on the podcast has said absolutely. It's been great. Get great feedback. And imagine, Jay, one of the things that I'm doing is we're talking. Yesterday, I was talking to somebody who retired from the RCMP in Canada, and we were talking about any number of issues, including diversity and even leadership mistakes that they had made when they came up through the ranks. And I think there's so many lessons that can be had by just hearing the perspectives of others who do the job.
We've had a couple RCMP on. I'd love to have more of our brothers and sisters up north on the show as well. And they cover such a large area, and they're so understaffed, and they are victims of the same type of violence that American law enforcement face all the time.
They are. They are for sure, and that's what I find is that. First of all, I'll say this: the police today, and what's going at, they're given a black eye by by the actions of a few. And there are some who ask whether or not there's systemic racism in policing. And I'm not sure that I buy that. I think there is racism. I think there is some systems racism. It probably ends up in the courts, maybe in corrections. It all depends on where you work. But I think most people who do this job do it for the right reason, and they are trying. To my knowledge, I have never knew anybody who went to work thinking, I want to shoot somebody today. It's just not in the mindset of a police officer.
No, it doesn't work that way. And I'll just go back real quickly on your thing about systemic racism. And people say, well, you don't know because you're a white guy, or you don't know because you're a police officer. I worked in underprivileged communities my entire career, high crime, high violence, and they were very underserved when it comes to schools and occupations and employment and everything else was always an issue. When I want to say systemic, systems are made of people. And if you take, let's just say 300 police, you can tell me every one of them is a racist? They don't have their own mindset, their own moral compass, their own way they were raised, right and wrong? It's just not logically possible.
Yeah, it's an uphill battle for people to believe that. I happen to believe it, and you do. It's a tough job. And here's the thing. The police officer today, even when they're watching what's happening in other places, they have to go to work. They have to put their gun belt on. Men and women are doing it every day, no matter what. And you can't say, I'm not going on the call. You have to show up. So it's a tough job, and it draws some tremendous people, and I'm glad to be a part of it. It's interesting, Jay. The other day, I was in a class, and they were asking me about. We were talking about police suicide and stress and all of those kinds of things. And then the student asked me, well, what are the things that you've been involved in? And I don't talk about them an awful lot, but there are things that you and I have had to do that clearly have an impact. I'll give you an example. On 9/11, I was asked to go down to, or I volunteered to go down to Ground Zero. It's the worst thing I've ever seen, and you scratch your head. Are you impacted by it? No. And then you'll see things that on TV, and you realize that you're transported back to that time. I'm sure you felt the same thing, whether it's a fatal or it's a shooting that you were involved in. We put them in little boxes, but there are things that just leak out at times. Unexpected times,
and never at the wanted times. That's the thing.
Never.
I'll recall this very quickly before we get a break. I was going to a convenience store with my wife. She had to run in to get something. I rarely go into those places. I don't like going into them for a lot of different reasons from my police career. And I could see through, and by the way, the reason why convenience stores have big windows up front is so that if there's a robbery or something going on, law enforcement outside can see in. That's the main reason why, or other customers. And there was a guy in there acting weird, acting wrong, just had everything set to radar off, the warning bells in my head. And I was like, honey, let's just wait a minute. Let's not go inside till this cat is gone. And it could be as simple as a guy wearing a winter coat when it's 65 degrees outside. Yep. There's something not right about them. We're talking with Dr. Steve Morreale. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Here's your chance to get into the ground floor, to make a donation to make the movie Gun Runner, based off of the true story of now retired police detective Maria Oliveira, who shot 6 times while investigating a crime, died 3 times, brought back to life, has been in the hospital for a month, rushed back to work, only to suffer a near fatal heart attack, and then several months later, a near fatal stroke. It talks about his recovery, his life after, and more. That's at gunrunnerfilm.com. Again, you can make a donation at gunrunnerfilm.com.
Did you know that Facebook has an estimated 3 billion active users all across the planet? Want to increase your presence and profit using Facebook? Learn how you can do that every day, like I do. Plus, you can earn revenue from Meta every month. All this without breaking the time bank. Learn how to work smarter and not harder on Facebook. Get step-by-step instructions on what to do and what not to do. Start with a free membership. Get details at letbreak.com, letbreak.com. That's letbreak.com.
Return conversation with Dr. Steve Morreale, a retired DEA agent. He's also a college professor and a podcaster, host of the Cop Doc podcast. You can find it on the LET Podcast Network. Do a search at letradioshow.com. Be Heard tab. You'll find it right there. Or just do a Google search for Cop Doc Podcast. Great name, by the way.
Thank you.
Before we went to break, we were talking about America's perception of law enforcement, and maybe that's part of the reason what's guided you into becoming a professor and podcasting as well. There's many things about the DEA. I'll be honest with you. I worked with them, so I have some knowledge, but many people don't understand or comprehend what they do. When we think DEA, we think of some of the fringe characters of Miami Vice, or we think of Narcos. And by the way, the guys from Narcos were on my show. Great guys. And
Good
both
guys.
of them came from very small town police departments, which defies stereotypes left and right, which I love about law enforcement.
Mm. Well, DEA was a great experience, I have to say, and it is very competitive to get in. They trained down at Quantico. There's only maybe 5,000 in the nation. When I got on, it was only 23 and was growing to 7,000. But it changed my perspective completely, because now all of a sudden you are independent. You're being taken away from your home, the area. My first stop was in New Jersey, but that put me in New York, working all kinds of different cases, and Florida constantly, and in South America. And that in itself mystifies people, because one day, I'll tell you a story, Jay. One day, I was on surveillance, and we were in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I was supposed to be home at midnight. We had friends coming over. It was actually Memorial Day weekend. And on my way there, the boss calls me and says, "Steve, you need to catch the next plane the next plane to Florida." And I said, "Well, what am I going to do with my car?" He said, "Just leave it there. We'll pick it up." And the next thing you know, at 8 o'clock, I'm in Florida. I had no idea I was going to Florida. I had nothing. I had no underwear. I had nothing. I ended up being down there for 10 days, and we were following somebody because the guy we were watching was leaving the country. And anyway, for 10 days, I chased him around. We were always 5 hours behind him, from Miami to Miami Beach, to the airport, and then ultimately we thought he was going back to Colombia. He ended up in the Dominican Republic, and so did I. And so it's just an amazing bit of trust to tell an agent to just go and follow him, do what you have to do to get that person. And then we basically had him removed back to the United States. I was on the plane with him, and when he got off, I was at the runway saying, "Welcome back." He had no idea that I was on the plane following him, but as he came back on, I identified myself as Agent Morreale, and I remember his name quite well. I won't use it, but "You are under arrest. Welcome back to America." and there it was. It was crazy. The things that we ended up doing, the surveillances and where it took us, and the danger and the undercover operations. It was pretty hairy, but very exciting. And to tell you the truth, I'm sure you would say the same thing. There were days that I missed the hell out of it.
There are times, this sounds very weird. For someone who hasn't worked in law enforcement, it almost got to the point where getting shot at was an adrenaline rush that I thoroughly enjoyed. I didn't enjoy the aftermath. And I jokingly tell people I'd have no problem chasing an armed murder suspect into an alley in a gunfight and not think twice. But asking a woman to dance at ladies' night in a nightclub was petrifying.
We have limitations, don't we, Jay?
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not rational. The scale doesn't work right.
No.
But with all that, people think there's a lot of glamour in the DEA. I know there's not. I know it's a real grind. It's a lot of work. And then you try to balance family life with that. Before we get into family life, the violence that these, and I'm using the term loosely, these drug gangs inflict in communities is unimaginable for most people. And I'm glad they have no way of understanding what it's really like. How would you describe the amount of violence that these drug gangs and cartels are capable of?
Well, they're very violent, and what I think is interesting is a DEA or an FBI task force will walk in and work with local police departments to ask, where are your problems? Where are your problem children? How can we help you? ATF does exactly the same thing. But so what happens is certainly drugs and guns go together, and they're not afraid to use them, and they're not afraid to utilize them. And in a lot of ways, there's some two-bit thugs and gangs are really fighting for turf, as you are well aware of, and so other innocent people get in the way because they're not afraid to say, "You somebody off, or you're stealing, you're in my corner, or you looked funny at my girlfriend, and the next thing you know, my way to retaliate is by using a gun and by shooting. So it infects and impacts local neighborhoods horribly. And I can say that the local police don't always have the resources to do that. The benefit of a federal agency that comes in, Jay, as you know, because you had that authority, is that, and I know you used to say that, you couldn't do the job, where you're now talking to the person for the first time, and as a local cop, what you're saying is you're going to jail, and the guy is thinking, so what? I went to jail a couple of weeks ago and I get out. Now you're going to federal jail, and you're not getting out, and the federal jail may not be in your state.
Absolutely. And you're going to serve every day that you get.
Yes. Yes.
That's a big
I think that's
hammer.
the leverage that you have. I'm sorry.
Well, it's a huge hammer to have over someone. And these are why one of the things I tell my wife all the time is drug people almost always flip. The hardcore criminal guy with the local police, maybe. But when you get them in federal and in federal jurisdiction, it's totally different, especially when you lock them up and you seize their houses and their bank accounts and their cars. And if they have airplanes, you seize their airplanes as well. And they're left with absolutely nothing but looking at 25 years and can do every day of it.
Right. And what I used to love to be able to do, the leverage you would have in talking to them to try to convince them to flip, would be to tell them that, what's your girlfriend's name? What's your wife's name? What's your brother's name? Do you know where Sandstone, Minnesota is? Because that's where you're going. Do they know how to get to Sandstone, Minnesota? Because it's 30 below zero there. And so you might want to talk to us, or else you're not going to see family for an awfully long time. And it's really very funny to see how quickly they turn.
Another thing that I encountered quite a bit, and personally, I know people are going to say, well, it's becoming legalized in most states. I don't care. If someone wants to smoke marijuana, I don't care. I'm a sober guy. I don't do any of that stuff. If you want to, go right ahead. But people back in the day would say, hey, look, it's just a nickel bag. I'm not bothering anybody. It's not hurting anybody. And then when I explained to them where your money goes and that you are funding Mexican drug cartels that are shooting people and burning them and putting tires around their neck and throwing them in 55-gallon drums, they don't want to believe it.
Well, and we saw that firsthand with DEA, and Enrico Camarena was killed in Mexico during my tenure, and I got into DEA in the 80s, I believe, early 80s, 83, I think, and what we were watching were issues that came up because, again, of turf war, like you just said. And when I went to Colombia, it was the same sort of thing, that they had a bounty on our heads. So I couldn't move around Colombia without Colombian National Police protecting me, in essence. And when I would get there, so interesting though, Jay, and you may or may not know this, if when a DEA agent travels overseas, they can't bring their weapon, but when they show up, you show up at the DEA office, usually in the embassy, and you're issued a weapon. And that weapon is only to protect yourself. You don't have any authority there without the national police giving you that authority, working in tandem. But remember, there was a lot of money on our heads. The same thing happens in Mexico. That's not a fun place for DEA agents to be. And look at what the country is doing with DEA agents, basically stripping some of their immunity, their diplomatic immunity.
We're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll talk more with Dr. Steve Morreale about his career in the Drug Enforcement Administration, his career as a college professor, why he does that, and his podcast. To do a Google search for Cop Doc Podcast. This is Law Enforcement Show. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. The other day, I was walking my dog and walked by a house that's been for sale, and their asking price is only $18.7 million. Here's the thing. There are plenty of houses for $1.3, $5, $10, $20, $30 million for sale, and people are buying them. What do they know? They're not smarter than us. They're not more talented than us. They won't work harder than you. Maybe they know things like putting tools in place that can make you more profitable. If you do any business on social media, creating content is one thing. The trick is, how do you turn those people that comment on your social media into consumers? It's a great tool, and you can get more information at letpops.com. That's letpops.com. Best of all, you can get started for free. letpops.com. Check it out today. Return a conversation with Dr. Steve Morreale, retired DEA agent, college professor, podcaster, host of the Cop Doc podcast. Thanks for being a guest on the show, and thank you for your service. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Before we went to break, we had such a great conversation too, by the way, Doc, about many things that people don't have a big or strong concept of about policing. When I say policing, that incorporates local, rural, city police, federal agents, DEA as well. It's nothing like Hollywood, nothing like what TV produces. And I think one of the most clear-cut examples is the misunderstanding people have with plainclothes, undercover, and deep cover. I never did deep cover, and I was lousy at undercover, but I was a great plainclothes narcotics investigator. And in the DEA, I'm sure you have all three.
Yes, we do. Well, I think it takes a special person, and I did my share of undercover. Most of the time, what I was doing was running big investigations. I mean, I'll tell you a story. I was supposed to be a mob guy, and I was buying heroin from Colombians in New Jersey and New York, and it was fascinating because the first buy was a kilo. It was worth $250,000, and it wasn't a problem. But the Colombians, who were treacherous people, and I'm not saying all Colombians, but Colombian drug dealers can be quite treacherous, and I remember them being afraid of me because I was acting as the mob guy, so they was afraid of the Italians. It was really comical, and within 2 meetings, we ended up taking that off, and ironically, we seized a number of pieces of property up in Vermont and such, and so it's very, very difficult. And I can tell you, I've covered many a person in undercover situations. You're listening to them, and you have to be very, very quick to access to try to save them. And so many people with DEA have been injured and hurt in undercover situations. So it's extremely dangerous. But you've got to have the gift of gab to do it. You
do. You have to be a great actor, too. That's the thing. Look, I look like a cop. I think I always have. I'll be that 85-year-old guy with a walker, and people say, shh, there's the police. It doesn't matter, and I could not pull it off. Yeah. So when you have someone sitting there, and by the way, you said earlier in the conversation, when you're dealing with drugs and large amounts of it, and dealers and turf wars, and them protecting themselves from being ripped off by other dealers, there's a whole litany of threats that undercover faces. Yes. You have to be on your game and look for any kind of warning sign that your life's in danger.
Yes. And when you walk in, one of the things you have to have a strong team supporting you and watching you, and obviously you're broadcasting, and that's the other thing, where are we wearing the wire so they can hear what's going on. And I can tell you that there are things that are so small that nobody can find them. But the bottom line is that you have to rely on your backup team. And when you're walking in there, first of all, it's a game. It really is a game. You know, show me the money, show me the drugs, show me the money, show me the drugs. It's one of those things. Who's going to win? And obviously there are ways that we operate, or DEA did operate, to try to protect that. And there is some money. There's big money. But yes, in order to protect themselves, there's almost always guns. There's almost always other lookouts that are also carrying guns. So you're in jeopardy until you can get out of that building. And so you have to be very careful. And it takes planning, and it takes gumption.
My hat's off to them. That's a special breed of person that can do that. And most people I know aren't born with that skill set. They may have a little bit of the acting ability, but it's acquired with time and experience. And I couldn't do it. I'll be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. I understand. I mean, I did some training for undercovers and such, and there's a way, and DEA is very, very good at it. They've done it for a long, long time, and all over the world. And what I feel is that it's an important job. But I have to say too, an awful lot of what we're doing now are wiretaps, or I say we as if I'm still there, and you know what I mean by that. It's in my blood. I was thinking as you were talking about the art of observation, and I think so many people who are not police officers just don't observe, including my wife. You'll say, "What car was that? What's that? Who was driving by?" And you know that you and I have taken book on what's going on and what the plate is, and so many people have no situational awareness, and so it comes with doing it and with being relied upon to take care of bad matters that most people don't want to deal with.
You have to be so observant. And a real quick story, when I was detailed the DEA in Baltimore, it was a rare occasion I got to go home early for whatever reason, and we were renting a second floor of we called row houses in Baltimore.
Yep.
And I was driving a Pontiac Firebird Formula 400, which is a DEA car. And I get to the street to park, and I've got long hair, a beard, everything else. Don't look like police. And there's two guys on the front porch of our house, and one of them is one of the fringe targets of our investigation. And I'm thinking right away, you're like, what are they doing? Are they looking for me? Is it retaliation? So you have to keep your head. I got on the radio, called for uniform units. They pulled them over away from the house, and we checked them out. And we never could prove they did anything wrong, but they got the message they were in the wrong area. And things like that, if I told someone that, they would say, again, propaganda, because there was no gunplay.
No, but you have to be on your guard, and especially now. I mean, unfortunately, police are targets, and there's such disdain in some segments. Thankfully, most of the people support police, and even with the things that we've watched. But it's not an easy job, and again, what you said, it's not for everyone. And we talk about that. Going back to my classroom stuff, we talk about that, and I think that's really important. What it requires and what it takes, and the impact on your own life, the impact on family, the impact on personal time. It's a different way of life.
Speaking of personal time, how was it for you maintaining a family life while you're in the DEA?
It was fine. And, as I moved on to become a supervisor, there are certainly people who want to hitch their wagon to that job, and that the job is everything. It becomes their identity. But I would bring people in and remind them, listen, I know this job is exciting, it's exhilarating, it's all of those kinds of things. You can hide, you can lie, you can do all of those things, but the bottom line is when the job goes away, they're going to forget you 5 years from now, 3 years from now. You'll have a couple of friends, but just keep in mind what's important, and that's family. And that kept me grounded, and I was lucky, and it sounds like you were lucky, that I had someone who was independent and understood and was supportive, and that made it an awful lot easier. DEA was a difficult job because it required long hours. Oh my goodness, Jay! 3 o'clock in the morning, up at 3 o'clock to do a 6 o'clock raid. Travel constantly. Travel to foreign countries. I've traveled to Russia. I've traveled to Europe. I've traveled to the Caribbean. I've traveled to South America. I mean, it really requires a lot of you, and so you have to have somebody back home that can take care of things, and I was lucky. I mean, at this point, I've been married 44 years, so I guess I picked the right one, and she's put up with my for a long time. Well,
I would say to you, please be sure to tell her I said thanks for her service as well. Very much appreciated. So now you're a college professor, and you have a podcast. Tell us about the podcast.
Well, the podcast, it's funny. As I go back in time, I was when I decided to go into the Army, I remember going to the recruiter, and the recruiter, I went to school. My first school was radio and television broadcasting, believe it or not. It was a 2-year degree, and I worked for a little while, but it didn't yield an awful lot. And so when I went to the recruiter said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Armed Forces radio or policing." I had met a person who I used to walk the beat with in a small city in Massachusetts, and I caught the bug at that point in time. And so, my whole life has been service. I'm in a public service for a long time. And so the podcast itself is to give back. And the title of the cop doc is, people say, "What you're the cop doc?" And I say, "No. All I'm saying, I'm a doctor of public administration. That's what I am. I'm not a medical doctor, but I understand organizations, and I can tell you that when I go and talk to other people and we speak the language of each other, the doors break down and they talk. Whether I'm in Russia or I am in, and this really happens, or in the Caribbean, or I am in Ireland, or I'm in Britain." There's that commonality, and so the cop doc is really about what's going on with leadership. How can we do it better? How can we help with training? How can we help with health of police officers? And those kinds of conversations and perspectives are really helpful. And the people who listen to it, and it's growing, people who listen to it are college professors, they're CJ students, they're practitioners, they're community leaders. And so it's going very well. And it's full circle, Jay, from my radio days that never took shape to doing a podcast.
It's amazing. Thanks for being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated, and we look forward to having you back in the future.
Thanks for having me. Take care. Have a good one.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.